as soon as you start talking image,
our RentSmart webinar. This is RentSmart, Repair Issues and Landlord Duties. And I would like to introduce you now to my bilingual tenant counselor, Edgar Aldrett. Welcome, Edgar.
Thank you, Celestine, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. We are very happy to be here. Thank you, Tony, for having us here. And we're here to give you some great information about tenants, well, the repair issues that tenants experience, and what are the landlord duties. So let me do this first. We're getting a little feedback going there, so I want to remove that. All right, so let us begin with the presentation. And again, thank you everyone for joining us here this fine, lovely afternoon. So as you can see here, for those of you that are online, you can see the agenda that we're going to be covering today. We're going to be focusing on repairs, some general information about that. And then along with that, we're going to be seeing some information about mold. And that's very important, especially here in Seattle, because there's a lot of folks that we do get a response from and queries from as well, indicating that they have issues with mold and would like to know what to do in those particular situations when it comes to their rental and what the landlord should be doing. So it's pretty interesting what you'll be learning from that. And then we'll dive into what the landlord duties are and the responsibilities under the RLTA, and which is the Residential Landlord Tenant Act, which I will be talking about momentarily as well. And then I'll be imparting some resources, some legal resources that are available in the community that you can reach out to get assistance so that you can be a very successful self-advocate in regards to your tenancy. All right, with that, let's get going here. And repairs, here we go. All right, so in regards to repairs, when you are having an issue in your unit, it is important to understand that there is a process that needs to happen. And some folks take it upon themselves that they just go ahead and contact the landlord or the maintenance department or the property manager or associate property manager or whomever that representative of the landlord is, their agent, and make that repair request. And of course, intuitively, it would seem more common sense wise to actually call them up or send them an email or talk to them in person, visit them down in the office. Well, guess what? That is not advisable. We recommend that you create a paper trail, and you want to have a documentable history of communication with the landlord. So with that, it's going to be very important that you do a work order or repair request to the landlord in writing. That is very, very important. That's going to help you out. So you start off with that repair request there. For those of you folks that are online, you can see that. Then what you do is that you contact the individual that is listed on the contract. By law, state law, and this is also applicable for all of us here in the city of Seattle, that what needs to happen is that contact information of the individual that you will be talking to in regards to your tenancy. And that has to have that information on there in that contract. So you want to check to see, make sure there is that. Sometimes they like, if you're living in a bigger complex, they like to post it in some location in near the offices or maintenance office, and then they have the email or the phone number. But so once you have that contact information, you know who you're going to reach out to. Hopefully it's an email as well, but it's good to have an address because you're going to be writing this repair request. Yes, you're going to be doing in writing. So that's very important. And then it's once you know what the issue is, you want to respond as quickly as possible as well, because time is of the essence in this situation. It has to be taken care of immediately, especially when it comes to mold or any issues relating to leaks that are happening in the unit, let alone if it's a fire hazard as well. So you want to report this as quickly as you can so that it becomes aware to the landlord or maintenance department, and that it shows that you're doing your due diligence and acting in good faith to contact the correct individual to actually start that repair. And then, as I mentioned, you want to communicate all that information when you're writing that letter, but also included in there are going to be some laws that you want to include there. That could be the SMC laws, Seattle Municipal Code laws, or the RCW's revised codes of Washington. That is the codes that represent the laws here in Washington State, RCW. For the interest of our purpose here, the chapter is 59.18. So RCW 59.18. If you were to do a Google search on that, that will take you directly to the Washington Legislature's website, and it'll have the information that you need to read about what your rights are. So, and we will have links to this presentation as well. If you make sure to reach out to the folks over here at Rainier Avenue Radio, and you can get a copy of this presentation as well. It'll be sent to you, and it has all the active hyperlinks on it. All right, so let's continue on here. Next thing, once you write that letter, then you want to do that in writing. And for those of you that can see there online, letter, email, text. Yes, letter, always hard copy that you want to do. And when it comes to email and text, well, it's electronic, and that always is a tricky scenario because it can be easily manipulated. So what we recommend is you do that writing as well as in tandem with an email and text. You want to follow up with that. When you do it in writing, make sure that you submit it to their address, the contact information, you send it one copy, regular mail, second copy, certified, meaning you're going to go into the post office and send that over, walk into the post office, request to get certified, and if possible, if you'd like, receipt confirmation on that and or signature as well to make sure that the landlord does receive that letter that you're submitting to them. Now, some folks, like I said, because it's easier for them to actually go ahead and contact them via phone or in person, we highly advise you not to pursue that avenue simply for the fact that you cannot document a phone call. No, you cannot. Recording, some folks think that, oh, I can do the recording and that'll be enough proof. Well, guess what? You need permission from the second party in order for you to record that. You can't just randomly record it. You do need permission, otherwise it wouldn't be admissible in court. The other is verbal, same thing. Some folks try to record the conversation. It's highly advised not to do so without getting permission. And more than likely, if you're recording a conversation with the landlord or the representative of the landlord, chances are they're going to say no. So just avoid it altogether. And pretty much what the laws also state, it focuses on a writing aspect. Everything says in writing. So that's how you want to approach this as well. Tenant portals, more popular. It's easy to use. It helps tenants out, has all that access information. It's on there. You can help the tenant out. Well, guess what? Tenant portals, I would not advise to utilize completely, be solely based on that as your way of communicating with the landlord, especially when you're doing repair requests. Why is that? Well, because tenant portals, landlords have the complete control. It's an app that is in the control of the landlord or their agent, property manager, maintenance, whomever that has access to that to manipulate the status of your request. And there isn't a state law in Washington that mentions that you as a tenant have to utilize a tenant portal. No, everything is still in writing. So with that, you can always bypass a tenant portal and issue a written letter. If they come back and try to issue a 10-day notice to comply, well, because our rules said that you have to utilize a tenant portal, like, no, the law doesn't say that I have to utilize a tenant portal. It says it has to be done in writing. So you approach it from that angle and make sure that you have that proper information on there, including all the laws and so forth, but you want to have a paper trail as well, show proof that you've done that. So this is the process. Once that happens, once you provided that information, then it sets your way onto a path where you do have options. So some folks are being informed about this particular law, RCW 59.18.070, which is a 3-tier time system where the landlord supposedly has time to repair or finish the repair in this allotted time based under this law. That's yes and no, that's kind of true. The way this functions, though, is when you read this, you look at it and, oh, 24 hours, 72 hours, 10 days. That's quickly how the landlord has to complete the job. Well, no, that's not what it's saying. The law says that the landlord needs to respond with remedial action to your work order based on the situation or the issue at hand. And looking at this 3-tier system, you can see for 24 hours, if the tenant is deprived of hot or cold water, electricity, heat, or the issue is imminently hazardous to the life of the inhabitant, usually a biohazard leak that's occurring or a heavy leak that's coming in supposedly from the pipes, the walls, or the foundation. Well, the landlord has 24 hours to respond. I mean, technically it's an emergency, but they do have to respond with remedial action. And what is remedial action? Basically that the landlord is saying, like, I acknowledge that I received your repair request, and this is the plan of action that I'll be taking, and it should be done in a reasonable amount of time. Well, the law says that it has to be done in a very quickly amount of time. It doesn't say reasonable, but it has to be done very quickly. There is no statutory definition of the speed of this issue needing to be rectified by the landlord. So how does one figure what that is out? Well, we advise folks to, some folks don't like to do this, but you'd get a better situation if you do follow this advice. Get 3 quotes from contractors, call around. You can go on Yelp or Angie's List or any of these organizations or these apps that have these repair things, and go in and submit a repair request and get a quote. When you get that quote, you're going to get the price and the turnaround time, the average. Once you have 3, then you can come up with the average time that is needed to complete this job. That gives you leverage. You have this information now to communicate back to the landlord and utilize that against the landlord because they're not doing their job. Now, getting back to this 3-tier system, we have the 72-hour where the issue deprives a tenant of the use of an appliance that was provided by the landlord, such as a refrigerator, range, or oven, or a major plumbing fixture that was supplied by the landlord, be it a toilet, a shower, a sink, a water tank as well. That's a plumbing fixture. So that's where that would fall under the 72 hours that the landlord has to provide remedial action. Now, 10 days, the 3rd tier, that is for everything else, and that's also applicable potentially to mold, potentially to pest control as well. All right, so, and there are other remedies that are available that tenants can approach. This particular law, 5918.087, that you can contact a government agency to report the issue that's happening. And they could, yes, such as code enforcement, and in our case in the city of Seattle, SDCI, Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections. This is who you contact, and you let them know that you're having a structural issue, an internal unit that is, violating a lot of building ordinances, and that the landlord is not up to code, and have them come out. You can do this online. They have it set up with the tenant service portal available online. Set up an account, submit the complaint. They will come and take a look at it. But if you're in another county or another city outside of here, Columbia City or Seattle in general, then you just try to find out who the actual code enforcement department is and get that contact information. But what this law states is that the landlord could potentially be held liable if they knew they rented the unit, knowing ahead that there were issues with it, such as mold. But if you were to file that complaint, that government agency shows up and they decide to condemn the place, well, you do have options, and you could potentially be reimbursed for $2,000 or 3 times the amount of rent, depending on which is greater, and also any prepaid or rent. Now, what about relocation costs as well? Would that be covered? Well, yeah, the law does. There is a law that mentions that there has to be a program in place in the city. Unfortunately, in Washington State, there are only 3 cities that do have this relocation assistance program where the agency shuts down the unit because it's deemed to be condemned. Those cities are Bellingham, Seattle, and Tacoma, and that's it. So just be aware of that, folks. These are the only cities right now that I'm aware of that have the relocation assistance implemented within their government agency. All right, another remedy is terminating the tenancy, which some folks would like to get out of there, and the landlord is not responding to their repair request. That is an option. However, it depends on the issue at hand. Doesn't mean that there's a cracked window or there's a hole in the wall or something as such that you're going to file a complaint and hopes that the landlord will allow you to get out of your lease contract, to break your contract. It's on a case-by-case basis, so it's going to depend on what the issue is, and majority of the time is that if the issue is deemed to be detrimental to the health and safety of the tenants in the unit, then chances are that they would allow that to occur, let the termination occur. And it's usually up to a judge or commissioner to deem that evaluation to see if you are able to break that lease. So it's on a case-by-case basis in that situation. So depending on what it is, I mean, here's an example. If you're deprived of hot water and you made the repair request, the landlord says, okay, I received your request, or that you don't hear from the landlord at all, and that does happen, and time goes by, say for instance 3 days, landlord still doesn't respond. And then what do? Well, you can technically break your lease at that point and say, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't trust this landlord, very negligent, irresponsible, and I'm going to break my lease. And it's highly advisable that you speak with legal assistance. There's volunteer legal assistance in King County and also in the city of Seattle that you can refer and consult, and hopefully they will tell you if you are good in a situation or that it could be questionable and the landlord would try to come back after you. So, and also in this law that you can pursue other remedies, and which we are talking about. And also you can take the landlord to court as well, and civil court or small claims court, which is part of civil court. Continuing on with other remedies, repairs. As you can see, this law here on the screen, RCW 59.18100. There are some folks who would like to redo the repairs themselves. If you decide to go down this path, it's highly advisable that you communicate beforehand with the landlord before you start implementing any of your own repairs. The thing is that if you're not licensed and bonded, I mean, chances are the landlord can come back after you if something were to go wrong based on your misinformation or missteps that you took in order for the repair, meaning that it went from bad to worse. That could potentially happen. That's why it's advisable to contact the landlord ahead of time with your plan of action, that what you're going to do. If you decide to do that, then what you can do is deduct up to 1 month's worth of rent. And that would you provide all the documentation, including everything that includes the materials that were utilized, labor costs as such, time that was meant, anything else, and have that proof of documentation. Here you go. This is the amount that I'm going to be deducting from rent. Now, if you utilize a third party that is licensed and bonded, such as repair person or contractor, and you contacted the landlord, let them know, because you got 3 quotes, and like, here we go. I'm going to pick one of these that I have, and I'm going to go with them, and I'm going to be deducting it from rent. How much can you deduct up to? 2 months worth of rent. The value of your rent, 2 months worth. Anything beyond that, you're going to be responsible for. So it's important to run the accounting on that, find out what the numbers are. That way you're not in a hole, then you're going to end up owing the landlord more money on top of that. That extra amount. So just be careful with that. And you can continue getting quotes and contacting the landlord. But in essence, this is meant to get the landlord to start waking up and doing something to repair the issue. Let's see here. All right. And this law also, as for those of you that can see it on the screen, it lists there that it doesn't create a employee-employer relationship, so that's important to know. It doesn't mean that you're an agent of the landlord, where the landlord can contact the individual like, hey, you did a great job of your unit. How about focusing on this other unit? Yeah, it doesn't mean that you have to do it. Could you do it? Sure. Make sure that if the landlord's going to pay you for that, that you get it in writing. You're free to do that as well. You're free to negotiate and come up with an agreement. Get that contract in place, that agreement in place, signed by both parties. Make sure you get your copy, and that the landlord has guaranteed to pay you for that you're going to do all this extra work. But that is your decision if you decide to go down that avenue. What else? Yes, it does not create a liability under workman's comp, and all the work that's done has to meet all codes, statute, ordinances, or regulations, especially the building codes here in Seattle. If it doesn't meet that, then chances are the landlord could come after you for that issue alone. And damaged property by tenant can be recovered by landlord, as I talked about. They can sue the tenant because of negligence or irresponsibility, not knowing what they were doing when they try to do the repair, or it could be even misrepresentation as well. And this does not alter the landlord's obligations as well, meaning the landlord is still responsible for trying to fix the issue as well if nothing were to come of it. These are things that you can do, and you're more than allowed to take your landlord to court, small claims court as well. You can sue your landlord. There's always the option of mediation and arbitration that is available for folks to engage with their landlord. Yes, and here we go, 59.18.110. It's the arbitration aspect of it. And what could happen here is that perhaps you did go to arbitration or mediation and nothing came of it. Well, arbitration, that's a tricky one. And I'll get more into details about the difference between the two. But what this law says here is if the unit can be reviewed under its value, its current value and its current condition. So you can sue your landlord, get him to court, get in front of a judge or commissioner that will review the issue at hand by saying, hey, take a look at this. I mean, there's all these issues. There's a hole in the ceiling, there's mold, there's a leak, the carpet's falling apart. There are, it's infestation of roaches and rats, and you have proof of all that. And I'm paying $2,500 just for a studio to have all this. And once you provide all that information, it'll be reassessed based on that, the value of its current condition, at which point then the landlord has to make good by doing all the repairs and taking care of the issues. Once they do that, then they have to go and petition to the judge that issued this revised value of the unit, and they have to agree. So they have to go into conversation and figure out if it's okay. Does it meet everything? Then the judge makes an assessment on it, and then they can put it back into that amount, the regular amount. Landlords cannot go and ask, well, how about I increase the amount? I spent all this money. No, they will not do that. They're going to be very fair. Like, no, it's going back to the way it was because you were negligent and irresponsible in your landlord duties. Other remedies here is substantial endangerment to impairment of health and safety of the tenant. Yeah, RCW 5918.115. Yes, weather exposure, plumbing and sanitation affects a tenant, lack of hot water. Yeah, so having a government agency review all this as well. So this is another part of that. It's an actual extension of what we were talking about. And these are the things that are listed in this RCW, what the landlord has to meet and what they would be looking into and reasons for that the agency could shut down that dwelling. And overall, it's important that if you do decide to assert your rights, because in Washington state, it's a self-advocacy state. Some folks aren't aware of that. They assume that there is a magic government agency that they can contact from Washington state or in their local city that they can go file a complaint and then they will act on their behalf. Unfortunately, there isn't anything. Hopefully with this new House Bill 1217 that is being reviewed currently in Olympia, and with rent stabilization, as it's called, they've also implemented a section in there where the Attorney General's office will have a department that will handle some complaints from tenants that they receive in Washington state where the landlord is egregiously increasing the rent and not meeting the new requirements under the new laws that were passed. That is a good stepping stone into what could potentially happen as expanding the department and adding more divisions in there to create an agency where tenants can contact and file their complaints against their landlord. But as of right now, there isn't anything. It's a self-advocacy state. So both landlord and tenant, they have to advocate for themselves. A lot of times landlords like to use that card where it's like, I have an attorney. I have an attorney that I can contact and they blah, 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 all that. Tenants, they can look for an attorney to help represent them if they qualify. Sometimes it may be out of pocket, or that there's a volunteer attorney in one of these agencies throughout Washington state and county that will help and act on their behalf. That does happen. But the downside to that, folks, in reality is there aren't that many tenant attorneys in Washington state, unfortunately. Post-pandemic, things have completely changed and shifted. So It is very difficult, but you want to be persistent and keep trying. There are paralegals that are currently working right now that can assist. So you would have to depend on them for the time being. All right, let's get into some information about mediation and arbitration. The difference, as you can see here, and these are allowable under these laws. You can see there for me, you're allowed to go to mediation based under the RCW 59-18-315 or arbitration, RCW 7.04 capital A.10. And underneath that section, you can see 4 RCWs listed under that are called out in the RLTA, where you are allowed to utilize an arbitrator. So what are the difference? Well, I tell folks, think of an arbitrator as a judge, because that's pretty much what an arbitrator is a judge that is moonlighting, having a second job. It could also be an attorney who is moonlighting, having a second job. And what does an arbitrator do? Well, both parties agree to sign a contract in which they will be paying a fee to this one individual, the judge or the attorney, that will make a decision, and both parties agree to the outcome of this arbitrator. Now, on the other hand, you have a mediation. What's a mediation? Well, that's where a third neutral party facilitates a conversation between both parties in hopes of coming up with an amicable agreement for both parties, and usually it's done in real time. Does it mean both parties have to adhere to the outcome of that? No, not necessarily. One of the parties can easily just walk away and say, I don't agree with this, this is pointless, and leave. Or not even show up at all, in which case we heard a lot during the pandemic. A lot of attorneys did, or landlords and landlords' attorneys did not even show up to mediation. So, I mean, you can kind of get an idea that landlords are aware of this. Like, I don't have to show up. I don't have to go through all this. I'd rather take my chances with either my attorney or going to court. So that's pretty much the difference between the two. All right, now documentation. So it's important to document. Here's a great listing of information that you have on there. Hopefully you can read that. The most important component is taking pictures. When you're doing the walk through, move in, walk through, move out. Pictures is important. Videos is very important. Having a witness with you is very important. Anything that's related to your unit, you want to document. And that move-in checklist is pretty much what's going to dictate the outcome of if you're going to get your deposit back or if you're going to get charged by the landlord. So it's best to document everything on all communications, repairs, same thing, document that. Anything that's occurring within your unit, you want to document that. And we're in a time where things are much easier. I know growing up for me, it was completely different where everything was analog. Now we're in a digital world. We have the ease of having a device in our hands that we can take a picture, we can record it, and it's small files, these little small compressed files that you can upload to a cloud account and keep it safe there. Even if you get hard copies, which you want to be dealing with hard copies, you can easily take pictures of all that and archive that digitally and keep track of that. I mean, we're in a great point right now where a lot of folks can protect their rights and it'll help them out. And you have all this documentation that can be done. So it's important to document everything that's related to your unit. Communications, I mentioned, writing a letter, setting a certified signature with signature, receipt of signature, receipt as well. You can request that at the post office. Receipt books, that is very handy too. I'm not sure how much they are now. I mean, they were being phased out because no one utilizes a receipt book. Everything's done digitally, but there's still some office supply stores that do carry this, and it's worth going there or even a dollar store and buying a receipt book. That way, you don't give the landlord the opportunity to come back and say, well, I don't have a receipt book. I can't give you a receipt. Well, especially for folks that live in mobile homes, a lot of cash is usually transferred as well. And that's what they prefer, be paid in cash. And a tenant is supposed to get a receipt every time they pay rent. Doesn't matter if it's through a personal check, a cashier's check, money order, they have to get a receipt. But, excuse me, just remember that the tenant needs to ask for it. That's the rub there in that law. It pretty much states that the tenant, if they want a receipt, they have to ask for it. Landlord would not automatically give it. So it's important that when you do pay, you can write in the memo section or notes section that receipt is requested to be returned to the tenant, something of that nature. And you have proof of it. Make sure to take a picture of that, or just send a letter to the landlord. I am formally requesting my receipts that I've made all these payments. or have a receipt book. You have that handy, readily available, and give it to the landlord, especially if you're going to pay cash in person, and just get that taken care of. It's very helpful. On this last link here on the bottom of this presentation, there's something called Appliance 411. If that's in regards to appliances that the landlord should only be charging you the use of the appliance during your tenancy. They cannot ask you to replace the entire appliance. That is completely illegal. They can only allow you to be charged, or charge you, I should say, the time of your tenancy that you utilize that. And there is an equation that you can figure this out, the value of that time that you were there in your tenancy. And I recommend, folks, that you go to the WashingtonLawHelp.org website and look up getting your deposit back. WALawHelp.org, and then getting your deposit back. In that packet of information, there is a chart on the back. They have the equations already ready to go from HUD. All you have to do is plug that in, and they're going to ask what is the make and model. You get that information from this website here. So that's why it's important to get the serial number. We know some landlords tend to rip that information out as well. I've heard from folks. So that way they don't know, what model do I have, or when was it manufactured? Well, take a picture, Google image search for it, and find out if the similar model. Then once you have that model, you can go look it up here, and perhaps you'll find out the years of when it was manufactured and utilize that. So there are ways around all this. Even though landlords try to be sneaky and clever, doesn't mean that they are. So you can be 2 or 3 steps ahead of them. All right, mold. Let's talk a little bit about mold. And I'm going to be honest with you folks, right now there is not much protections for tenants against mold in Washington State. There, I said it. There isn't much in the RLTA where it says, well, you know, the landlord has to take care of the mold or any issues relating to mold. There's very, very little information relating to that information, unfortunately. One of the bigger ones is that when you move in, the landlord has to provide you an EPA guidebook of information about mold. I have a picture of that momentarily. You can see that. Or a link leading to that PDF online, and usually that's embedded within the contract itself when you're going through, and there's a link there. But pretty much this is it. So what you can do is you're going to treat it as a repair request, and you can contact code enforcement to file a complaint. Or this has been an issue as of late, but I've been hearing Department of Health calling them and letting them know that there's a health issue going on here. There's this building structure issue. Landlord is not doing anything right now, but it is affecting the health of all the inhabitants. So hopefully they'll come out and take a look at it. Bottom line is the law says that the landlord has to keep the unit weathertight condition, and if they're not, then you can pretty much guess that you can utilize that as a reason. So you go after that. What about if there's a leak in the plumbing? Yeah, you want to make sure that that's what's occurring. If there's a hole in the ceiling or within the walls, trying to figure out like, yeah, there's an issue that's going on there. And then what's also happening is that it's creating a structural damage to the internal portions of the unit, such as the walls, the dry walls, and it's creating health hazards for the inhabitants, and they're getting sick. And you can also go to a doctor, get a report to show proof of that, or that you can do a test yourself if you want to do that. That's a cheaper route. Or the little bit higher end route is hiring a mold remediation service to test the type of mold that's occurring, and they could potentially look at what the source is and give you a report on that. That's an out-of-pocket expense, but what you can do is let the landlord know what you're going to be doing ahead of time, and that you'll be deducting from rent if the landlord refuses to pay for that amount. And pretty much here, RCW 59.18.060, aptly titled landlord duties, but sections 13 and 14, this is pretty much what it says, what the landlord's responsibilities is. And this is all that mentions in the RLTA about mold. Not very helpful, is it? And what's funny is that last quote on the bottom, for those of you who can read it on screen, the landlord and his or her agents and employees are immune from civil liability for failure to comply with this section, except where the landlord and his or her agents and employees knowingly and intentionally do not comply with this subsection. How the heck do you prove that? How can you prove that? That makes no sense whatsoever. It's very difficult for a tenant to prove that the landlord knowingly ahead of time rented a unit knowing that there was mold in there, because they always come back and say, I didn't know that. Maintenance, I didn't know that. and all they do is just paint over it. So this is all stuff that you want to document, especially when you're moving in. Before you sign anything, look at the condition of the unit. If it's happening while you're living there, document that and file a complaint as quickly as you can. And here, folks, is a copy of the EPA guidebook. As you can see there, it's blue, mold, moisture, and your home. Basically, it's telling you how to deal with mold. Such tips that are in that book are increase the air temperature, keep the humidity low. You can always request a dehumidifier from the landlord. Ventilation and air movement's important. So, these older buildings that don't have a back window for ventilation where there is plumbing available, such as bathrooms, they request that you have a fan blowing in and out, keeping the circulation going because there's no ventilation fan located in there. Any condensation from these horribly made buildings, especially these older double pane windows that were created back in the 80s and 90s. There's a lawsuit, you can look it up online in regards to that they were poorly made, and a lot of landlords use that because the B stock is cheap, and then it creates mold, and it's a whole structural issue. There's that. Condensation appears, that's a red flag. That means there's moisture coming in, and it's best at this point to document that and clean it up as best as you can. Any water accident that you encounter, you want to clean that as quickly as possible. The reason being is that all it takes is 24 to 48 hours for mold to build up, because there's moisture, there's cold, and there's organisms in the air. Right now, every human being is breathing that, especially in this room. There's dust particles from dead skins and animals. That all just lands on water, it just stays there and eventually starts growing. And if there's the right climate, it's cold, dank, it'll just happen. So it's very common in the Pacific Northwest to experience mold, unfortunately, because yes, of our climate. So to me, that's how I'm seeing that there is not much protection for tenants, and it's not good. So treat it as a repair request. On the slide, you can see continuing further things that you can do, more tips like vacuum and cleaning, getting rid of all, as best as you can, any dust, dirt that's accumulated. You are technically allowed to clean up a patch, no more than 3x3 patch of mold. You can do that yourself. If you do decide to go after that, as it states here, that you want to limit your exposure, wear an N95 mask and wear gloves and goggles, and you can utilize off-the-shelf cleaning products for mold. Or what I've done in the past is just use bleach. You want to be careful that you don't damage anything. If everything around you is white and there's carpet, you want to cover that up, spray it with bleach, but stay out of the unit. Do it in the morning, leave, come back in the afternoon, evening, and progressively will be dying. But that's just a Band-Aid. Ultimately, the landlord, needs to be actually taking care of this issue. Carpets is an issue as well, especially with older upholstery, and having these type of carpets in a dank area, it could be a potential problem. So you want to be wary of that, especially in basements and enclosed bathrooms that don't have anything. Living in an uninhabitable unit, landlord is definitely liable if they knowingly rented this unit. The best way to find out before you move in is contact city code enforcement, and they will have information on that as well, that there are complaints in the past, especially with mold. I did a search for a tenant yesterday, went SDCI, looked up the map, found out the history. They have documents on there like, yeah, there's been issues with this house. It is not good, and they met the minimum requirement under city law and somehow got their registration for the city. That's the RRIO program. I don't know how they were able to do that if the place is still falling apart. I'm not touching that one. And what else? The unit was in very bad condition and so forth. Utilizing some services like Yelp, you can do that. Some folks aren't aware of that. If you do a Yelp search for apartment buildings, you're going to see a lot of the feedback from tenants that were there. It's pretty interesting seeing what they have on there. So Department of Health, they can contact and request a record of history of that unit. And as I mentioned, code enforcement, you can contact them. SDCI, Seattle is the main one that you would want to contact. And the link is here. King County, unincorporated King County. Where's unincorporated King County? Well, some folks should be aware of that, because I hear it all the time, folks calling from, example, White Center. and you're saying, well, I'm in Seattle. What's your address? I look up the address. Are you below Roxbury? Yes. Well, you're not in the city of Seattle limits. A cutoff is Roxbury. You are technically in unincorporated King County. You're not in Burien. You're in White Center, unincorporated King County. Same thing for Skyway, the North Renton area, Northeast Renton area. Some folks that are there in that neighborhood, they assume that, well, it's Seattle. Well, I don't know where it is, but no, it's unincorporated King County. Vashon Island, unincorporated King County. East Sammamish, or major regions of East King County, that's all unincorporated. Just go onto this website. You can enter the address and it'll verify if you're in unincorporated King County. If you are, file your complaint with the code enforcement. All right, folks, that's information about repairs. Now we'll be jumping into some quick information about landlord duties. And ultimately, what you want to know is, who is the landlord? Well, as you can see here, and this is taken verbatim from the law itself in the RLTA, landlord is defined as the owner, lessor, or sublessor if you're subleasing, of the dwelling unit or the property of which it is a part. In addition, means any person designated as a representative or agent of the landlord, that be the owner, lessor, or sublessor as well. So, yeah, if you are subleasing, and that is a big trend that's going on where people are renting houses, especially to students, and then they're subleasing, and sometimes without the knowledge of the landlord. I mean, that's something that you want to question that situation. It's like a money-making scam. So folks, just be aware of that. If that were to occur, you want to find out, are you the actual landlord, the owner, or are you subleasing? And then they're just charging this exorbitant amount of rent. So they're still technically the landlord, unfortunately, but they're caught in between this gray area of landlord-tenant. What else? Name and address, as I mentioned, that is a requirement that the landlord needs to provide in the contract. And are there any charges they must inform? Yeah, so changes in the ownership. Landlords need to provide that information if they're changing property management companies. And usually what they do is they post it in a public area so that all the tenants can read it, but they neglect to inform tenants. Or sometimes they do. They send a letter around to everyone saying, hey, here's the new property management company. This is your point of contact. Sometimes they don't. And then you're guessing who's in charge. Well, you're going to have to contact the owner and find out. Well, how do I find out the owner? Well, there's a way of finding out who pays taxes on a property. But what if it's an LLC when I do look it up on that portal? Then you go to the Department of Commerce or the Secretary of State's website and find out who the CEO is and who registered under that LLC and get that information. It's all public information that's available online. That's how you find out. And chances are you find a telephone, email, name, address. Then you have a contact already ready to go to send all those complaints, repair requests, information to that individual who's the owner. If your landlord lives out of state, they are still bound to Washington state landlord-tenant laws, meaning what takes precedence takes precedence in a situation, landlord-tenant issue. Washington soil, bottom line. So if your landlord lives in China and all of a sudden they're like, well, no, I don't have to abide by these laws. No, yes, you do. You do. Well, I'm going to take you to court. And say, well, I can't go to court. Well, guess what? They allow it to be done online. So yeah, fat chance, buddy, you're going to have to be actually showing up on Zoom or Teams in court. So no more excuse like it was before. You're going to have to show up in court. And yeah, what takes precedence here is Washington state law. And here's a list of the responsibilities of the landlord duties under that law again, 5918.060. You can see that the landlord's responsibility, maintain premises or comply with all local ordinances in the city of Seattle, SDCI law, building code, supply heat and water, both hot and cold, keep common areas clean, make repairs, maintain the unit in weather-tight condition. That's the most important one. And provide locks and keys. That's very important. Trash receptacles for apartment complexes, not for single-family dwelling homes. That's up to the tenant responsibility. Maintain that all electrical, plumbing, heating, and other facilities and appliances that are supplied by the landlord. That's their responsibility, so you want to keep track of that. Make repairs of the premises as it was at the beginning of the tenancy. What does that mean? That means tenant's responsibility in a tenancy is to keep the unit in the same condition that it was when he first moved in or at the commencement of the tenancy, hence the checklist, the walkthrough. Landlord's responsibility is to maintain that unit in the same condition that it was when that tenant moved in. So that's why you contact them, like, you need to put it back how it was when I moved in. But what if you improved it? Well, then you want to document that in the checklist and send a copy to the landlord, the appended version, like, I've updated it, I fixed everything, this is a condition now, and it's reflected on that checklist. Here's my copy that you gave me that I'm supposed to have with both signatures on it. So there are a lot more other things that are listed on that particular law, but I put that link in there so that you can actually go and peruse through it and find out. But if it's too much legalese for you, then I recommend going to the WashingtonLawHelp.org website, do a search for landlord duties, and it'll come up, and everything is written in layman's terms, easy to understand, and you know what your rights are. Some illegal actions of the landlord. First one, for those of you that can see it online, self-eviction. Illegal, not allowed, because you had no intent of moving out. The landlord locks you out. And even though that you are behind on rent, doesn't matter. If I'm behind on rent, you have to follow the procedure, issue the predicate notices, air vacate notice. And then if you're going to continue with the eviction, go through the process. But regardless, I am legally allowed to stay in this unit. You cannot lock me out. That is a self-eviction. Who do you call then? Well, definitely not the police. This isn't a crime. Sheriff? No, they're not going to get involved either. Well, what you can do is try to negotiate with the landlord, let them know what they did wrong, try to find an attorney, see if they'll be able to communicate with the landlord, or that you can contact a locksmith and say, hey, I locked out my key, my landlord locked me out, I had no intention of moving, and then send a bill to the landlord. And then if they say, no, I'm not going to pay for this, then like, well, I'm going to take you to small claims court and get you in front of a judge to show proof that you illegally locked me out, which is against the law. So those are some steps that you can take. Evicting tenants for unpaid late fees. Yes, you cannot do that. If you have a balance of that, some landlords tend to threaten tenants like, hey, you haven't paid your late fees. So I'll pay them at some point, but you cannot evict me for that. And that's a law there. Disconnect services that they provided, such as internet or cable, entering the tenant's home without proper notice. That's invasion of privacy. Landlords are not allowed to do that if they're going to come over to the tenant's door or property, including putting 1 foot on the land that the tenant is renting, be it a lawn, that they need to issue a notice. And it could either be 48 or it could be 24 hours, depending on what the issue is. Mainly for repair issues, we're talking to the tenants of 48 hours. If they're there to look at the unit for repair or they're showing it off to prospective tenant, prospective buyer or a applicant, they just issue a 24-hour notice that they need to give to the tenant. That is required. Otherwise, if the landlord just keeps showing up, violating your privacy, track that. Keep track of that, and you're going to have the dates and time, because you can take the landlord to court and then request that the judge issue you payment of $100 for each instance the landlord intentionally violated this particular law. That's why it's important to document everything and have proof of that. Increasing costs without notification. We hear that quite often, the rent increase, and that's why we have that House bill right now, 1217, that's going through. We're going to be modifying the rent increase, the amount throughout Washington state. There's now going to be some new requirements and where it's going to be applied. So, but regardless, the landlord has to follow the same process, issue the proper notice. They can't just automatically start increasing the rent and utilizing that as a reason to threaten the tenant because they were self-advocating for themselves. That's retaliation, which is completely illegal as well. Document any instance that is occurring. Landlords are not allowed to do such activity. Turning off utilities. Well, it's understandable if there's doing a repair, and if the landlord's going to be doing that, make sure that they issue that notice to all tenants saying on this day at this time the utilities will be out because there's going to be a repair going on. That's very common. But if they just decide to turn it off, not communicate with you, not send you an email or any form of communication, that's retaliation and harassment. So that's something that you do want to document. Selling property, tenant's property, meaning that the landlord goes in and takes the property and it's like, well, no, you haven't paid rent, I'm going to take this. That's just theft. Call the police. Theft, that's a crime. So document that as well and call the police. Requiring tenants to take on landlord responsibilities, can't do that. such as the example, the repair, like, hey, can you do this other thing at this other unit? You can say no, then the landlord starts harassing the individual, like, well, then I'm going to increase your rent. Like, that's retaliation. And no, it's not my responsibility. I'm not your agent. Renting condemned property, pretty self-explanatory. You want to document that if the place is falling apart, or if it's a shack. I mean, yeah, or go look it up if there's any complaints. The retaliation, as I mentioned, it's listed on there. You're asserting your rights, document that. And there are some examples listed on that slide of retaliation, such as threatening to evict a tenant, increasing rent, reduction of services, or increasing obligations, are just some primary examples of what retaliation is defined as. All right, folks, looks like we're coming to a close here. We got 10 minutes. So with that, I am going to give you some information, some resources here that are available in the community that you can access. And these are some legal services. A good example here is the Tenet Law Center. And that is an organization that is sponsored by Catholic Community Services. And they have what is called the King County Tenant Resource Line for I highly advise folks that are low income and having eviction issues or subsidy issues and would like help with an attorney, that you contact this organization or that line and seek assistance to do an intake. It may take a while for them to respond because they have a few attorneys and a bunch of paralegals working with them that are all spread thin currently, helping folks that are going through an eviction at this time. And yes, there's still an ongoing tsunami of evictions that are happening in the King County courts right now. So just be aware of that, folks. And the Northwest Justice Project, who is also working in conjunction with the Tenant Resource Line, you can contact them via that number that's listed on there, or 211. You can contact 211 to be connected with the Northwest Justice Project in your county. We have the Housing Justice Project. That's another organization that's working with the King County Tenant Resource Line, and they're utilizing that service to do an intake for folks and provide information to individuals that are being evicted. So if you're formally served the eviction papers, a summons and complaint, meaning these are the formal documents with the King County letterhead on it, and it has a case number on it. It says that you are now being served type of information on that. This is a complaint. This is a summons. You immediately contact the Housing Justice Project before they would be able to intervene and assign an attorney to help you out. At this time, because of, like I said, that tsunami of eviction that's going on, that they're going to have you attend a workshop at either the Kent location or downtown Seattle location. And it's going to be a workshop where you show up. Yes, unfortunately, you're going to have to show up, and they're going to show you the process, what's happening, what you're going to need to be doing for yourself, and they can help answer any questions at that time. That's how much you're spread thin at this time, folks. So it's important that you do contact the Housing Justice Project, get that information, attend those workshops, and try to protect yourself in that situation. You can also send them an email that's listed on the screen there, folks. That's hjpstaff@kcba.org. For those of you living in East King County, there's the Eastside Legal Assistance Program based out of Bellevue. They have a Spanish intake line. But right now, from my understanding, it ebbs and flows in regards to accepting new clients because they fill up early in the year and then they work with them, and then it opens up again and closes, opens. And so you might want to contact them, but especially with landlord tenant issues. But if you have a DV issue and you're located in King County, this is who I recommend that you do contact and get assistance, and they will help you out in that regard. I mentioned about mediation. That is an option, and I highly recommend that you pursue this avenue. We have the King County Dispute Resolution Center that's located here in Wallingford, and they do mediation as well. And then for those of you in Bellevue, we have the Bellevue Conflict Resolution Center that is sponsored by the City of Bellevue. All right. Oh, thank you. And then finally, we have our information here, the Solid Ground Tenant Services message line that is available Mondays and Thursdays, 10:30 a.m., 1:30 p.m. Our phone number, 206-694-6767, or email at tenantwa@solid-ground.org. Again, tenantwa, TENANTWA, @solid-ground.org. You can contact us, and we'll, depending on what your issue, we can provide you information about your rights and resources where you need to go and steps that you need to follow, basically helping come up with some sort of game plan and what you can do. Also, check out our website for Rent Smart webinars. We currently have May 6th coming up. We have the Rent Smart information on evictions and terminations. May 12th, we're having the Rent Smart mold and your tenants' rights. We go into more details about molds. And May 28th, we have what to look for as a senior renter. We have that's a two-parter for May 28th and June 3rd. June 11th, we have, June 3rd is breaking your lease, information about breaking your lease on that. And that's what we have going on right now. So please visit our website and get more information on that. At which point I would like to thank Tony, thank you, and Rainier Avenue Radio for having us here. And hopefully that you have learned something here today, know what your rights are when it comes to repair work. That is very important. So please contact us if you have any questions. We want to help you be a very positive and successful self-advocate. Solid Ground Tenant Services, we're here to help you out, folks. Have a good day. Take care.